waited. Then I said, what a bunch of assholes. This ain't over yet. I'm going to keep coming and I ain't going to stop.
Colten Boushie was shot point blank in the back of his head. The 22-year-old Cree youth died instantly. The man who shot him, Saskatchewan farmer Gerald Stanley. In this era of reconciliation, the verdict, not guilty, deepened racial divides across the country.
But we live in a society where we are treated differently and looked at differently.
For most Indigenous people, they felt they had just witnessed a colonial, white supremacist system at work. This is a place race collides violently. Court was held in the same town. 8 Cree men were hanged in 1885 for rebelling against the Crown. In fact, it's been labeled the Mississippi of the North.
The Mississippi of Canada hasn't changed. You're not going to be embarrassed of something that gives you tremendous privilege.
Saskatchewan has the dubious distinction of being one of the only parts of the world outside the U.S. where the KKK really took hold.
The history of the KKK over there and stuff like that, it's a fact,
In a place where growing up Indigenous meant knowing where not to go to stay safe. Like, stay out of the town of Bigger.
It's just not a safe town for a native guy to go.
Your protocol stinks.
But it's also a place where farmers are sick and tired of property crime.
Probably 80% of us, farmers here, will do exactly what Gerald Stanley did.
It's within this context that Colten Boushie and friends drove onto the Stanley farm. Friends say looking for help. Gerald Stanley says he believed this group of youths were up to no good. In a recent Angus Reid poll, 63% of Saskatchewan residents agreed with the verdict, and some Stanley supporters weren't shy in showing how happy they were.
Oh, they're wearing their I support Gerald Stanley buttons, and they're, talking on Facebook about how finally someone's taking their concerns seriously. What about Debbie Baptiste? She lost her boy.
Right now I just feel like I'm so lost without really knowing what to say about my son because I miss him so much. He laid in his blanket.
To get comfortable for this interview, a mother spreads her son's blanket over the couch and calls his dog to her side.
So whenever I take this blanket around with me, it's like he's with me. This was Colten.
Like all mothers, she saved his achievements and with pride shows them off.
He got a certificate for science when he was in third grade. He went to a spelling bee.
He was a Boy Scout, a bookworm, always on the computer, and played viola in band.
He could play Titanic on it. When he was in third grade, his teacher was really proud of him, and she told me that he said the world would get along if we all got a good book to read and sit under a tree. And then she said, your son is super smart. We used to call him Harry Potter.
They also called him Coco.
His brothers were growing up and they couldn't say Colten, so they called him Coco, and that stuck with him.
She watched him grow into a young man. Her proudest moment when he graduated high school. She said he had dreams big and small, a move to BC, buy a new truck, chef school. He had just received his forest firefighter ticket.
So my son was really a smart boy. He would have made a difference in this world.
It's a story of a magic bullet. And if, in my opinion, if you listen to the testimony, it doesn't really have a ring of truth.
On August 9th, 2016, Colten Boushie and 4 friends drove onto this property. It belonged to Gerald Stanley, a local farmer. The group had been partying that day, swimming at a nearby lake. Stanley and his son Sheldon believed the group was there to steal. Gerald Stanley admitted to kicking in the front headlight, and his son, he smashed the windshield with a hammer. The driver attempted to flee but crashed into Stanley's car. 2 men that were with Colten ran. Gerald Stanley approached the vehicle with gun in hand. It went off, a bullet striking Boushie in the head, killing him. Boom, the thing just went off, he told the court. In fact, his defense said it was an accident. Boushie's companion's story is this: they had a flat tire. They simply were looking for help.
Shouldn't he have said like, oh, there's people coming down the road that need help. I hear they got a flat tire. I might be able to help them. You know, no, he just came out shooting.
Stanley testified he loaded his gun with 2 bullets, but according to the evidence, he actually loaded 3, firing warning shots into the air. He insists he continued to fire until the gun was empty. This was before he approached the driver's side window. He says he worried his wife was under the vehicle, and when he reached in to take the keys out of the ignition in a freak accident, the gun went off. And that was his defense. It was an accident.
Yes, there was a broken gun there, but there was no evidence that it was pointed at him or anyone who tried to fire the gun at him, so I don't think that a self-defense argument would have worked.
The jury believed it was an accident. He's a free man, and now the Saskatchewan Crown Attorney's Office found no grounds to appeal the verdict.
The Crown cannot appeal a disagreement over the facts, the interpretation of witness evidence, or because a particular perspective leads to the opinion that the verdict was unreasonable. The Crown cannot appeal because some people have questions about how the investigation was done or what the lawyers did.
And our concern here, the concern of Lawyers' Rights Watch, is that a real investigation has yet to take place.
This international human rights lawyer disagrees. She says there are grounds for an appeal, and it stems from the very first day of the investigation.
It was apparent very early on, like within a day or 2 of the killing of Colten Boushie, it was apparent that the investigation that was taking place was not competent, was irregular, and was the family had already complained about the investigation.
Eleanor Sunchild is a North Battleford lawyer looking after the interests of the Boushie family, but she is also a family friend.
The moment Colten was shot, the investigation was treated more like a property crime than a murder. And you see that in the way in which the witnesses were treated. They were arrested.
The federal RCMP watchdog, the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission for the RCMP, has initiated a complaint and will investigate the RCMP's conduct, including the search of Colten's mother's house and how information was sent to the media. And potentially crucial evidence, including blood, was lost when the vehicle was left with doors open in the rain overnight. The vehicle was then misplaced, breaking the chain of evidence when it was left in an auto body parking lot. Stanley was taken into custody but quickly released and not questioned for a few days.
The Attorney General probably should have jumped in as soon as he heard about how the RCMP responded to the killing.
Davidson wrote the Saskatchewan government 3 times recommending an appeal. Because of the botched investigation, the jury could not weigh all the evidence.
It's just hard to think of those decisions being made if the ethnicities were reversed.
The way the police conducted them in informing the mother about the death of her son was totally inhumane. They went into her house, did an illegal search. They told her, Colten's dead.
That's how they informed her. She fell to the ground in shock, and one of the officers said, "Get a hold of yourself," or words to that effect. They smelled her breath. And that's how this family's been treated since this occurred.
Coming up, the justice system in Canada is under the microscope after this case, and long simmering racial divides boil over.
He wanted to get married and have kids. He said he'd have 5.
Waylon Roan is from the Mosquito First Nation and lives just 20 minutes away from the Stanley farm. He took APTN out there. No one lives here now. The farm's up for sale. And there is a sense of how lonely these back roads are. We took this time to have a chat about race and growing up here. Was he made aware of it all the time?
Not at all. It's just when we went to play sports against the bigger kids, the town of Bigger, you felt that hatred. It's mostly wagon bears or drunk Indians, whatever, savages, you know, like that. And to hear that from kids yet, and teachers not doing anything about it.
56-year-old Gerald Stanley was found not guilty of second-degree murder on February 9th.
This ain't right, this ain't justice, and the law system failed my family.
Eleanor Sunchild thought he would be convicted, at least on the lesser charge.
It was shocking, you know, because we had held on to just a sliver of hope. And given the testimony that we had heard about the hang fire and it not making sense, we thought, well, there's no other alternative than to find a verdict of manslaughter.
Rob Feist is a local defense lawyer. He was not active in this case. He attended court as a curious citizen. At the heart of the defense is something called hang fire. It's when the trigger is pulled, but the bullet remains in the chamber. Feist says it's safe to infer it was at least multiple seconds before Stanley made it to the window after he fired into the air. Hang fire usually lasts a split second.
And the biggest question is raised by the improbable length of that hang fire. That hang fire is a 1 in a million shot at very best.
From Stanley's testimony, Feist questions actions such as firing all his bullets into the air as warning shots, making the gun useless for self-defense, while at the same time demonstrating a lack of basic gun safety training.
I've instructed firearms for years, instructed thousands of kids on how to shoot. Anyone who takes a firearms course will be taught before anything else that you don't point a firearm at anything you don't want to shoot.
You see, if you look at the Firearms Act and if you look at the Criminal Code, it's difficult to see where even shooting the gun into the air was lawful.
Stanley testified he did everything possible to make the gun safe before approaching the window to turn off the ignition.
The idea that Mr. Stanley, if he legitimately believed the firearm in his right hand was inoperable, why he wouldn't, when he's going through the window of the vehicle, shift that firearm into his left hand and use the logical hand, the short route, to turn that vehicle off quickly.
Gun charges were saved for a separate trial.
See, there's so many issues having to do with the use of a pistol that weren't there, that apparently weren't there.
I can't say that Mr. Stanley's version of events didn't happen. There are significant questions with all of those things happening in sum. It is as though the planets aligned to give Mr. Stanley the defense that worked.
Stanley won't talk to the media, but his lawyer put out this statement offering condolences to the Boushie family. The Stanley family is relieved that the criminal process is now complete, but this is not a happy day. A young man died. This is a terrible tragedy. There is no going back. There is no making it right. We hope that with time, the Boushie Baptiste family can begin to heal.
I was choking on my words. I had tears. I was full of panic and anxiety and just rage, man.
As Stanley ran out of the side door, a free man, flanked by RCMP, Indigenous social media blew up. Protests organized across the nation. A unified cry. Everyone gathered here in Vancouver or here in Winnipeg or Toronto knew what just happened.
Standard operating procedure for what is Canada, for what Canada is built on, and for how Canada continues to exist.
And that unfairness extended to the courtroom. What appeared to be an all-white jury set Stanley free. Boushie family lawyer Eleanor Sunchild witnessed how that went down in court.
I know it's on race because every visibly Indigenous juror that stood before to be selected was challenged.
During jury selection, both prosecution and defense have 12 challenges each, and the right to dismiss a potential juror without any explanation. Jury selection is one of the issues the federal government grabbed onto in the aftermath.
Had there been the 3 or 4 jurors that were Indigenous on the jury, we may have very well had a different result.
She says that Saskatchewan suffers from a cultural divide driven by deeply ingrained and even decades-old attitudes.
I think there's always been a fear, and I don't think it's a valid fear of Indians. And I think that fear has been taught and passed down since the settlers came here. There's stories of the thieving Indian, or the drunken Indian, the wild savage Indian that people have to fear.
Local non-Indigenous farmers Christine and Glenn Freethy agree the narrative remains, despite the fact that Stanley didn't even use the self-defense argument at all.
He didn't need to use that as a defense. If it's something that's built into the mindset of people, you don't need to say it in court. The jurors already have it in their heads.
People know we vote for the NDP, so we're already political weirdos.
Tired of the hypocritical narrative that these kids were up to no good, Christine Freethy took to Twitter and put her neighbors on blast.
One guy said he's from Saskatchewan, and I must be out of my goddamn mind if I think it's normal to drink and drive around, because he never did that. And I responded with, then your mom drove you around and you have no friends.
When she put it on Facebook, it went viral.
Everyone who lives in Saskatchewan has been on a booze cruise. It has a name. You get drunk in the day and drive around because you're bored, okay? And so I just wanted to normalize it. And I also found it infuriating because I saw people I know who have booze cruised saying about how, oh, they're drunk and they're criminals. Well, you know what? I know you've done exactly what they did.
Part of that narrative includes assertions from farmers and residents who say the real story here is not about race, but about crime. Farmers say property crime in the area is out of control.
If we shot every trespasser who comes into our yard, I'd have a mile-long fence of human corpses. It happens all the time. I mean, it happens so much that someone came into our yard and was drunk and ran over our dog,
Yeah. Somehow he made it out of here alive. Yeah, isn't that odd?
I caught 4 people in a vehicle in my yard who did not belong there.
That anger and fear is on full display post-verdict as the RCMP held town hall meetings to discuss property crime.
And we know from recent events in the news, drunk to the point of mental incapacity, armed, meth heads.
People are blowing it out of proportion.
Much of the anger shown here in Purdue, Saskatchewan, is directed at the RCMP.
The feedback that I've received has been entirely positive, and that these talks are very constructive.
Who cares what color you are? It's not a race issue. It's a criminal against a victim.
But online is where the thoughts of those that connect race and crime are laid bare, including this rant from an RCMP member not even stationed in the area.
Reprehensible things that make me feel ashamed and saddened, and my heart just goes out to Colten and his family.
There's still some decent people who are embarrassed of the verdict, embarrassed of...
Yeah, but they're silent.
Yeah, and that's bullshit. You gotta have some guts, and you can't go with it.
So I have tremendous concerns about what this verdict is going to do for our community.
The round dance is celebratory, inclusive. If you want to grab a hand and help complete the circle, you are more than welcome. Christine Freethy organized this flash mob to coincide with opening ceremonies of the Saskatchewan Winter Games. Not one of the many people waiting in line for the games came over to join. Reconciliation here is a long way off. Instead, there's fear and anger. Every day, the Boushie family endures another slap in the face.
Gerald Stanley's GoFundMe page is well over 100,000. So it's as if he's being rewarded.
With no appeal pending, but an upcoming investigation into the RCMP, some are calling for the entire thing to be dealt with at an inquiry.
Right. There's been inquiry after inquiry for how many years? There's been the Neil Stonechild inquiry, the Manitoba Justice Inquiry, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. All of those inquiries and forums speak about the injustices that Indigenous people face within the Canadian criminal justice system. This is just merely one more example.
He wanted to learn everything about the culture, traditions. He wanted to help people out. My prayers are just hoping that this situation never happens again to anybody. Nobody deserves this. He was really a smart boy. He had his whole future ahead of him. He was kind, thoughtful, respected people around him, no matter what race you were.